War. War never changes. Atoms, on the other hand, split and join to their heart's content and don't complain about it all the time in a gravelly voice. I don't know about you, but the little Sims and workers and resources are absolutely mad for the marvels of fissile materials. And you can imagine how excited they were to find a patch of some radioactive death rock under a nearby mountain, and the future now promises to be as bright and shiny as they like.
Join.
Die!
Join.
Die!
Last time in the Soviet Republic of Arab map, we put a huge tap at the national border and opened it to bring thousands of tons of stinky oil to a couple of disastrously polluting factories that make plastics for the industries that need them. All to make sure that Billy here can get a personal electronic computing machine for birthday and spend his time playing historical war games instead of becoming a productive member of society. You know what else isn't a productive member of society? Uranium! The geologists at the Order of Lenin Institute of Fortunate Discoveries have found a nice uranium deposit not far from the city, so we might do well to exploit it in potentially lucrative ways. But the whole process of turning uranium rock into pure chunks of concentrated power goes through 4 production facilities. There must be some sort of a scheme to import one thing, turn it into something else, and then export it for big ka-ching. So, how do you go about this radioactive wonder? Now, if we look at the amounts each individual factory consumes and churns out, we find a jumbled mess of random-looking numbers. So to make some sense out of all of it, let's bring them to some sort of a common denominator. Let's assume we want to make 1 ton of nuclear fuel and then to export it. Let's also assume that we import uranium ore, electricity and chemicals, and that we use local labor, of course. This is for simplicity's sake. We'll discuss mining and the power plant later in this video. With that 1 ton of nuke juice in our hands, we can determine the production multipliers for each factory. In other words, how many days each factory needs to run to get you the materials for that 1 ton. It's 10.5 days for fuel fabrication, for example, and a lot less for the other 2. These multipliers might also give us a hint about the perfect ratio for combining these factories together. For every UF6 plant, you need 2.4 fuel factories and a bit more than 1 oxide plant. You could try combining them in all sorts of mad ways, but the conclusion is pretty clear. The 2 + 1 + 1 combine is the sensible, realistic arrangement, with the oxide and hexafluoride factories having to work at 83% capacity. But back to the resources. To make a ton of fuel, you need hundreds of tons of ore, thousands of workdays, and about 9 tons of chemicals. I don't need to tell you that the fuel itself is incredibly valuable. But is it still valuable if we subtract the cost? The difference is still bloody damn colossal. So what if this thing shoots invisible death sparks? The profits of making nuclear fuel are simply mad beyond all belief. So now that we know the full size of this radioactive pie, let's find out how much each factory in the chain adds to it. The oxide plant is by far the tiniest and cheapest of the uranium siblings. Its profit margin is smallish by comparison, and its share in the total payout? Yeah, I'm sure the other 2 deliver a lot more. The upside is that making this factory happen is the definition of low hassle. If you can bring it the uranium ore it needs, this little gizmo pays off in 1 week, and it cashes in 2.5 grand a day. Have I also told you that it's a very reasonable polluter? It's a perfect fit for any vacant lot anywhere between the kindergarten and the cancer ward. Just make sure there's a loud train coming in every second to unload the uranium ore. Now let's look at the hexafluoride plant, which is a much dirtier sibling here. Dirtier as in filthy rich. It does actually have a slightly higher profit margin, and it covers 11.5% of the total pie. So now you can take a wild guess where most of that nuclear value is actually created. But what if we forego making nuclear fuel and just sell UF6? How quickly will it pay off? Yeah, about that. The factory is over 8 times more expensive than the oxide plant, and it brings in only 3.5 times more in daily profits, paying off in just under 19 days! It's also a lot more attractive than the oxide plant logistically, because it doesn't heat up a train wagon full of ore every day. So if you don't have your own uranium mines, this is where you should probably start. And finally, the fuel fabricator. which is the biggest, fattest member of the uranium factory. It costs a mad amount and is easily one of the priciest industrial structures in the game. And you have to build 2 for every pair of smaller factories you have. So get ready to pull out your People's Savings Bank credit card. The upside, it generates so much money that the plant itself pays off in just over 2 weeks. It accounts for 84% of the profits of the entire production chain and unloads 27 grand every day. I said once that meat will get you into space. That was rookie space, training wheels space. It's time to get the real deal and crack some uranium. With all of this in mind, we can clearly see what kind of a nuclear combine we can create to maximize income, as most of it is generated closer to the end of the line. If you don't have easy access to uranium ore, my suggestion would be to build a hexafluoride plant and 2 fuel factories. Set up open storage for uranium oxide so that if you decide to add the oxide maker later, it'll be an easy inclusion for that 4% bonus in profits, which, let's just be frank here, is just not worth importing the ore for. This actually leads us to the question of what about uranium mines? Well, ore accounts for about 24% of uranium processing expenses, and building a mine of your own is the best way to cut that cost. A full production mine with a source quality of 50% can reduce total expenditures by about 20%. But because the production chain is so profitable to begin with, this translates into about a 3% increase in what ends up in your treasury. The mine is expensive to build and it is relatively slow to pay off, plus running it requires a bunch of other infrastructure, but it does pay off. So if you do have access to a uranium deposit, just go for the whole thing, for a fun construction challenge and for knowing you've extracted everything this production chain can give you. But I know what you are aching to ask about by now. There's that 5th stage of the whole atomic enterprise, and it's the nuclear power plant. And if you just want to sell electricity, I recommend that you don't go there. Because exporting nuclear power actually loses you money compared to just selling fuel. So much money, in fact, that I had to recalculate it a few times over, looking for mistakes. I may be missing something, but it seems you're just not going to recover the costs with electricity. So only start building nuclear power plants when you know that you already have massive demand for power and you want a convenient, centralized way to cover it without imports and all the infrastructure it takes. This is a place where commodity production with intent to sell, ends. Nuclear plant is for when you build because you need nuclear energy. And as a final point, it's becoming traditional that I talk some rubbish. Remember how I gave the hazardous waste recycler the death sentence a few videos ago? Well, it's time to bring it back from the dead because all of these uranium-making factories make an ungodly amount of these nasty green barrels. So much so that if you decide to export them, the cost will eat up about 1/3 of your profits from the entire production chain. This really is something you shouldn't just overlook, and it's worth planning some sort of disposal for this stuff. There's always the incinerator, of course, but come on, a single recycler processes more waste than the nuclear facilities make, and you can easily integrate it with the factory connections and turn this into the first dedicated hazardous waste management site for all of your republic. So there, yet another profitable enterprise for our people. And this might be the time for us to take a good look at what we still buy for some reason and ask if we can make our own uranium rods. Why can't we make that? Why indeed?